We can now bring in Jean-Pascal van Ypersele, Professor of Climatology and Environmental Sciences at the Université catholique de Louvain. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Evening.
What we're seeing now has been described by the French Prime Minister as a catastrophe on an unprecedented scale. Is this just a seasonal issue?
No, I think it's once more a very strong signal that climate change is intensifying the conditions that make those very big fires and forest fires more likely. Drought, extreme temperature, lack of rain for long periods. And these are coming very often and in many regions of the world with the climate change that is human caused. So we can only blame ourselves.
So you mentioned the lack of rainfall. Is that the primary issue of what is causing these fires?
It's a facilitating factor. It's not the only factor. Of course, you also need a burning material that can burn easily. But drought and the lack of rain for a long period, of course, facilitates that kind of fire. Also, strong winds can also facilitate the extension of those fires. So there's a number of conditions with the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, already in its report 5 years ago, said would become more common with climate change. And unfortunately, we are seeing now the reality of that projection.
So what can authorities do? Because we seem to have these problems year in and year out, and still we have wildfires.
Well, I don't think we're going to avoid wildfires completely, but I think the strategies there are two big axes to what can be done. One is to update the strategies to combat the wildfires and to revisit those strategies in the light of the intensifying facilitating conditions coming from climate change. And the other thing, and that is something that Greece, for example, has done recently, and they succeeded in decreasing by about 1/3 the amount of wildfires they had until recently, updating their strategy to combat the fires and to prevent their extension when they are there. But the other axis is more upstream prevention of climate change itself. If we don't fight climate change much more than what we do today, we're going to have increasingly those kind of conditions.
You spoke about dry vegetation, the conditions on the ground right now, which sort of facilitated the wildfire, which we're seeing in the south of France. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a pilot project which was launched actually in France to get goats on these, to eat these shrubs, which would eventually go on to fan the flames of fires, essentially. And the goats was a cheap method of solving the problem. Have you heard about this? And if it is successful, why is it not more widespread?
Well, I'm an expert on climate change. I'm not an expert in fighting wildfire conditions, but certainly in general, de-shrubbing or decreasing the amount of shrubs likely to take fire easily and facilitate the extension of fire, whatever the method is, whether it's by goats or through other methods, is certainly a good idea. And if it can be done by goats in certain regions, why not? Yes, please do that more if possible. But too many shrubs is very often a facilitating condition as well. And too little efforts are made by many citizens to decrease the amount of shrubs on their terrain.
Because I have you here, and you're a climate expert, let me ask you a question. Because we have these intense fires now in the south of France. Last week it was in Greece. But at the same time, we've also had parts of the world that have experienced very, very heavy flooding. I'm thinking of northern India and Hong Kong. Is this the trend which we're going to continue to keep seeing?
Yes, it's a bit paradoxical, and I understand that not everybody can easily grasp why this is related to climate change. But you have to see climate change due to all greenhouse gases, mostly CO2 coming from the burning of fossil fuels and from deforestation, as a kind of doping drug, which is boosting the extremes. And some of the extremes are towards dryness in some parts of the world at some times, and at other times in other regions of the world, it's towards more intense rain. I mean, we know, for example, that when climate is warming, for each degree Celsius additional, you have 7% more water vapor in the atmosphere. And so when the conditions are met for that water vapor to condense, you can have more extreme rain. But the other side of that is that with climate change, you have more evaporation on the ground, and that facilitates droughts and dryness. So, it's a combination of factors, but in general, climate change intensifies the extremes, both kinds of extremes, the dry extremes and the wet extremes.
Jean-Pascal van Ypersele, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.